When Daniel Carter discovers unsettling changes in his wife Sarah's behavior, his seemingly perfect life begins to unravel. What starts as a suspicion of infidelity quickly spirals into a tangled web of betrayal, hidden secrets, and financial deceit. As Daniel digs deeper, he uncovers shocking truths about the woman he thought he knew, and the dangerous schemes tied to her lover, Eric. With mounting tension and escalating stakes, Daniel is forced to confront not only Sarah's lies, but also his own resilience. How far will he go to reclaim his life, and what twists await in this gripping tale of love and betrayal? They say life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. For me, that moment came during what was supposed to be the most stable time of my life. It was the summer of 2016, and everything about my world seemed predictable. I was 29, living in a quiet suburb just outside Austin, Texas, where the cicadas hum in the evenings and neighbors wave from their porches. My name is Daniel Carter, and until that year, I thought I had it all figured out. My wife, Sarah, and I had been married for 6 years. We met during college at a community volunteer event. Of all places, she was outgoing and fiery, with shoulder-length auburn hair and a smile that could light up a room. I was quieter, the kind of guy who avoided the spotlight but found comfort in her energy. Somehow, we balanced each other out, and for a while, it felt like the perfect match. After college, we built a life together. Sarah became a marketing manager at a tech firm in the city, while I worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company. Our schedules were demanding, but we managed to carve out time for each other. Weekend getaways, movie nights, and lazy Sundays spent on the couch with our dog, Max. We even bought our first house 3 years into the marriage, a cozy 2-bedroom with a backyard big enough for barbecues and maybe even kids one day. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. That summer, things began to change. At first, it was subtle, small shifts in Sarah's behavior that I shrugged off as stress from her job. She started staying late at work more often, coming home tired and distracted. Our conversations became shorter, filled with half-hearted responses and absent-minded nods. She used to text me throughout the day, little notes about funny co-workers or ideas for our next vacation. But those messages grew fewer and farther between. When I asked about it, she brushed it off, saying her workload had increased and she didn't have the energy. I wanted to believe her. I told myself that everyone goes through rough patches and that we'd find our rhythm again. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Sarah wasn't the only one with changes in her routine. My work hours had recently shifted, giving me mornings off before heading to the office in the afternoons. It gave me more time at home, but it also meant I noticed things I hadn't before. Like how often Sarah's phone buzzed with messages she didn't share, or how she'd excuse herself to take calls in another room. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I trusted Sarah, or at least, I wanted to. But the unease gnawed at me, a constant whisper in the back of my mind. I confided in my best friend Tyler during one of our weekly meetups at a local coffee shop. "You're overthinking it," Tyler said, sipping his iced latte. "Work stress can do that to people. Just give her some space." "Maybe," I replied, though his words didn't ease my doubts. Tyler had known me since high school, and while I appreciated his optimism, he wasn't the one living in my shoes. Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it. A few weeks later, Sarah told me she had a work retreat coming up, a 2-day event at a resort a few hours away. It wasn't unusual for her company to host team-building trips, but her announcement caught me off guard. "Why didn't you mention this before?" I asked. "It came up last minute," she said, avoiding eye contact as she packed an overnight bag. "I didn't want to stress you out." I tried to push down the unease as she kissed me goodbye and drove off. But as the hours dragged on, the doubts grew louder. By the second night, I found myself scrolling through her social media, looking for any hint of where she might be or who she was with. Her posts were vague. A picture of a conference room, a view from the resort balcony. Nothing incriminating, but also nothing that put my mind at ease. When Sarah returned, she was distant. Her responses to my questions clipped and unconvincing. I wanted to believe her. But the cracks in our relationship were becoming harder to ignore. Around this time, an old friend re-entered my life. Rachel, a former co-worker from my first job out of college. We reconnected by chance at a networking event, and after catching up, we exchanged numbers. Rachel was everything Sarah hadn't been lately. Warm, attentive, and genuinely interested in my life. We started meeting for coffee occasionally, and though our conversations were innocent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. It wasn't long before Sarah noticed one evening, as I sat at the kitchen table responding to a text from Rachel. She walked in and glanced at my phone. "Who's that?" she asked, her tone sharper than usual. "Just an old co-worker," I replied, trying to sound casual. "We ran into each other recently." Sarah didn't press the issue, but her expression said enough. For a brief moment, I wondered if she was feeling the same unease I'd been carrying. But if she was, she didn't say. The real turning point came a few weeks later. Sarah had left her laptop open on the dining table, and as I walked by, a message notification popped up on the screen. It wasn't her usual chat with coworkers or friends. It was a name I didn't recognize, and the message was oddly personal. I shouldn't have looked, I knew that. But curiosity got the better of me. As I clicked on the message thread, my heart sank. The conversation was flirtatious, filled with inside jokes and plans to meet up. It didn't take long to piece together that this wasn't just a colleague or a friend. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the screen as the realization washed over me. Sarah was hiding something big. I closed the laptop and sat down, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part knew I needed more information before making accusations. Over the next few days, I began paying closer attention. Sarah's behavior only confirmed my suspicions. The guarded phone calls, the sudden work obligations, the way she avoided my gaze when we talked. It was as if the person I'd married was slipping further and further away. I confided in Tyler again, though this time my tone was more serious. "I think she's seeing someone else," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. Tyler hesitated before responding. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but I'm working on it." After that day, it was impossible to look at Sarah the same way. Every interaction felt like a performance, every smile like a mask. I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I decided to keep digging, hoping to uncover the truth. If I was wrong, I could live with the guilt of snooping. But if I was right, I needed to be ready for what came next. The first thing I did was revisit her laptop when she wasn't home. The messages were still there, and this time, I noticed they weren't just casual exchanges. Her work retreat had included a dinner date with this man, a colleague named Eric. The way she described their night left no room for interpretation. She was emotionally and likely physically involved with him. That realization was a punch to the gut, but I wasn't ready to give up. I loved Sarah, or at least the version of her I thought I knew. And part of me still wanted to believe there was a way back from this. I decided to confide in Rachel. I know, not the most logical move, but at the time, I needed someone who wasn't tied to my life to give me an honest perspective. We met at a park downtown, sitting on a bench overlooking the lake. "I don't even know how to start," I admitted, staring at the water. "But I think Sarah's cheating on me." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow, are you sure?" I nodded. "I've seen messages, and I don't think it's the first time either." She hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. "I'm so sorry, Daniel, I can't imagine how hard that must be. It's like, I don't even know who she is anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We built this life together, and now it feels like it's crumbling. Rachel placed a hand on my arm, her touch comforting. You deserve better than this. Whatever happens, just know that. Her words stuck with me, but they didn't erase the doubt. Part of me felt guilty for leaning on Rachel while my marriage was falling apart, but I couldn't deny how easy it was to talk to her. She listened without judgment, offering support I hadn't realized I needed. Over the next week, I started to notice more cracks in Sarah's behavior. She'd leave the house earlier than usual, claiming she had meetings before work. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, and when I tried to initiate a conversation, she seemed distracted, even irritated. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen and saw Eric's name flash across. My chest tightened as I picked it up and opened the message. It was a simple text. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. That was it. The last thread of denial snapped. I knew I had to confront her, but I wanted to do it on my terms. The next day, I asked Tyler for advice. We met at a diner, and over greasy burgers and fries, I laid everything out. I don't know, man, Tyler said, shaking his head. You can't keep letting this eat at you. If you don't confront her, it's just going to get worse. I'm afraid of what she'll say, I admitted. What if she denies it? Or worse, what if she admits it, and there's no going back? Tyler leaned forward, his expression serious. Look, you deserve the truth, no matter what it is. And if she's not willing to give you that, then maybe it's time to walk away. That night, I stayed up late, replaying Tyler's words in my mind. I knew he was right. Avoiding the confrontation wouldn't make the problem disappear. But before I could face Sarah, I needed one more piece of evidence to solidify my case. The following evening, I followed her. I know it sounds extreme, but at that point, I needed to see it with my own eyes. She told me she was working late, but I had my doubts. Parking a safe distance from her office, I watched as she left the building. Not alone. Eric was with her, and the way they walked together, laughing and leaning in close, left no question about the nature of their relationship. They drove to a restaurant on the edge of town, one I'd never heard her mention before I stayed in my car, snapping a few photos from a distance. After dinner, they got into Eric's car and drove to a hotel. My hands trembled as I snapped more pictures. Watching them walk inside together felt like a dagger to the heart, but it also gave me the clarity I needed. The next morning, I confronted Sarah. I waited until she was getting ready for work, sitting at the kitchen table with the photos spread out in front of me. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. "You tell me," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "I followed you last night." Her face paled, and for a moment, she was speechless. Then, she snapped. "You followed me. That's insane, Daniel. What's wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I shot back, my voice rising. "What's wrong is my wife sneaking around with another man and lying to my face about it." Sarah's defensive posture crumbled, and tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lonely and we've been so distant lately." "Don't put this on me," I said, cutting her off. "I've been here, trying to make this work, while you've been running around behind my back." The conversation devolved into a heated argument, with Sarah alternating between apologies and excuses. She claimed she still loved me, but her actions said otherwise. By the end of it, I felt more exhausted than angry. That day, I started researching divorce lawyers. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I knew there was no coming back from this. Sarah's betrayal had shattered the foundation of our marriage, and no amount of apologies could rebuild it. In the weeks that followed, I leaned on Rachel more than ever. She became my sounding board, the person I turned to when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. And while our relationship remained platonic, I couldn't ignore the growing connection between us. One evening, as we sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Rachel turned to me. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. "It might not feel like it now, but you will." I nodded, grateful for her support. "I just wish I'd seen the signs sooner." "You can't blame yourself," she said. "People make choices, and Sarah made hers. Now it's your turn to choose what kind of life you want moving forward." Her words stuck with me, and slowly, I began to piece my life back together. The road ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how it all unfolds, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more engaging stories, just like this one. The weeks following my confrontation with Sarah were a blur of emotions, legal consultations, and awkward silences at home. She moved into the guest bedroom, and we only spoke when absolutely necessary. Every interaction felt like walking on eggshells, but the tension was nothing compared to what happened next. One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer, Patricia. She had been working on the initial paperwork for the divorce and wanted to ensure I had all the evidence I needed to protect my interests. I told her about the photos and messages I had gathered. "That's a strong start," she said, her tone businesslike. "But if there are any financial entanglements, we'll need to dig deeper. Infidelity can complicate asset division." The mention of finances reminded me of something Sarah had said during our argument. She claimed she was lonely because I was too focused on work and money. At the time, I brushed it off as an excuse, but now it felt like a breadcrumb leading to something bigger. I began going through our shared financial records, looking for anything unusual. For the most part, everything seemed normal, until I noticed several large withdrawals from our joint account over the past 6 months. The transactions were vague, labeled as miscellaneous expenses, but the amounts were significant enough to raise a red flag. I decided to confront Sarah about it that evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, when I dropped the printed statements in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, glancing at the papers. "You tell me," I said, crossing my arms. "Because I don't remember agreeing to thousands of dollars in miscellaneous expenses." Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. I needed the money for some personal things," she stammered. "Like what?" I pressed. "And why didn't you tell me?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. "It's none of your business." That response was like pouring gasoline on a fire. "None of my business?" I snapped. "We're married, Sarah. Everything we have is supposed to be shared. We're not exactly acting like a married couple, are we?" she shot back, her tone venomous. The argument escalated, but she refused to give me a straight answer. Frustrated and suspicious, I decided to dig deeper on my own. A few days later, I met with Patricia again, showing her the financial statements. "This doesn't add up," I told her. "I think she's hiding something." Patricia nodded. "We can subpoena her financial records if necessary. In the meantime, keep an eye on any new transactions." Determined to uncover the truth, I enlisted Tyler's help. He worked in IT and had a knack for finding information most people would consider inaccessible. After a few hours of digging, he found something shocking. Sarah had opened a separate bank account 6 months ago and had been funneling money into it. "She's either planning to run or preparing for a fight," Tyler said, his expression grim. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Sarah's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated. I didn't know what hurt more, the affair or the realization that she was actively working against me. The next turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, while I was at Rachel's place, We were sitting on her couch discussing the latest developments when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "What is it?" I asked. "It's Sarah," she said, showing me the message. "She wants to meet." My heart raced. "Why would she contact you?" "I don't know," Rachel said, her brow furrowed. "But I guess there's only one way to find out." The following day, Rachel met Sarah at a coffee shop while I stayed nearby, waiting for an update. An hour later, Rachel called me, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "She tried to warn me to stay away from you," Rachel said. "She accused me of trying to steal you and said I was the reason your marriage was falling apart." I felt a surge of anger. She has some nerve. "There's more," Rachel added. "She said if I didn't back off, she'd make things difficult for both of us." The veiled threat sent chills down my spine. Sarah wasn't just angry, she was vengeful. The situation reached its boiling point. A week later, I had been gathering more evidence, both for the divorce and to protect myself against whatever Sarah might be planning. One evening, while she was out, I found a folder in her desk containing documents related to her new bank account and what appeared to be a lease agreement for an apartment downtown. She hadn't just been preparing to leave, she'd been actively building a new life. When Sarah returned that night, I was waiting in the living room, the folder in hand. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice cold. Her eyes widened as she saw the papers. "You went through my things?" "Don't turn this around on me," I said. "You've been lying, cheating, and stealing from me. What's your endgame here, Sarah?" She didn't answer, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. Finally, she muttered, "I deserve to be happy." "And I don't?" I asked, my voice breaking. "After everything we've been through, you couldn't just talk to me. You had to destroy everything we built?" For the first time, Sarah looked genuinely remorseful, but it was too little, too late. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said softly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "That makes two of us," I replied, my tone final. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional fallout. Sarah moved out, leaving behind a house full of memories I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. The divorce proceedings were messy, but with Patricia's help, I managed to protect most of my assets. Throughout it all, Rachel remained a constant source of support. She never pushed for anything beyond friendship, but the connection between us grew stronger with each passing day. By the time the divorce was finalized, I realized I wasn't just letting go of Sarah. I was opening the door to a new chapter. If you're still with me, thank you for sticking around for this roller coaster of a story. Don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The weeks that followed Sarah's departure were like walking through a minefield of emotions. Every corner of the house reminded me of her. The laughter we used to share, the promises we made, and the betrayal that shattered it all. But as much as I wanted to wallow in the pain, there was too much at stake. My focus turned toward rebuilding, both emotionally and practically. Meanwhile, Sarah wasn't staying quiet. I began receiving cryptic text messages from unknown numbers. Warnings, accusations, and even threats. At first, I thought they might be random pranks. But when one of them mentioned Rachel by name, I realized Sarah was behind it. She was lashing out, trying to make me pay for a mess she'd created. It all came to a head when Rachel called me late one night, her voice shaky. "Daniel, someone's been following me." My heart dropped. "What are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "It started a few days ago. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but tonight, I saw the same car parked outside my apartment when I got home." "Did you get a look at the driver?" I asked, already feeling a surge of anger. "No, they drove off when I approached, but something's not right," she said. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. This was more than just bitterness, it was harassment. Rachel, I'll handle this. You don't need to deal with it alone. The next day, I met with Patricia to discuss the situation. She advised me to document everything and file a police report if the behavior continued. If this escalates, we can pursue legal action, she said. But for now, let's focus on protecting yourself and Rachel. That night, I parked my car near Rachel's apartment, determined to keep an eye on things hours past without incident. But just as I was about to leave, a dark sedan pulled into the lot and stopped near her building. My pulse quickened as I grabbed my phone to record the scene. The driver didn't get out but stayed parked, their engine idling. After a few tense minutes, I stepped out of my car and approached, my phone camera trained on the vehicle. As I got closer, the driver suddenly sped off, tires screeching. I barely caught a glimpse of the license plate, but it was enough to report. The next day, I shared the footage with the police, who promised to investigate. While I couldn't prove Sarah was directly involved, the timing and context were too coincidental to ignore. It was a stark reminder of how far she was willing to go to disrupt my life. At the same time, my relationship with Rachel was evolving. We spent more time together, not just as friends, but as two people who had been through the ringer and found solace in each other's company. One evening, over takeout and a movie at her place, she turned to me with a hesitant expression. "Daniel, do you ever think about what's next for us, I mean?" Her question caught me off guard, but it wasn't unwelcome. "I do," I admitted, "but I don't want to rush anything. After everything that's happened, I want to be sure I'm ready before starting something new." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I appreciate that. I don't want to be the reason you don't move forward." "You're not," I assured her. "If anything, you've helped me see that there's still good in the world, even after everything I've been through." Our conversation hung in the air, unspoken feelings swirling between us. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was a step, a promise to take things one day at a time. Just as I began to feel a sense of normalcy returning, a new twist threw everything into chaos. One afternoon, Patricia called me with urgent news. "Daniel, we've uncovered something significant." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "It's about Sarah's finances," she said. "She's been funneling money into a third account, one that's linked to Eric." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're saying they've been working together?" "It appears so," Patricia confirmed. "We're looking into whether this account was used to hide assets or cover up other activities, but it's clear they were planning something beyond the affair." This revelation sent shockwaves through me. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Sarah and Eric had been plotting behind my back, likely to gain leverage in the divorce settlement. But now that we had proof, the tables were starting to turn. That evening, I called Rachel to share the news. "It's worse than I thought," I said. "Sarah wasn't just cheating, she was scheming." Rachel's voice was steady but tinged with anger. "What are you going to do?" "Fight back," I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. "I'm done letting her control the narrative." Over the next few days, Patricia and I worked tirelessly to build a case. With the financial evidence in hand, we were able to challenge Sarah's claims in court, exposing her deceit and securing a more favorable settlement. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and protecting what was rightfully mine. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. One morning, as I was leaving for a meeting with Patricia, Sarah showed up at the house. She looked disheveled, her usual composure replaced by a mix of desperation and anger. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, keeping my tone firm. "Please," she insisted. "I made mistakes, but we can fix this." Her words felt hollow, like a script she'd rehearsed too many times. Fix what, Sarah? The lies, the betrayal. "You didn't just hurt me, you tried to ruin me." She flinched, her eyes brimming with tears. I was scared I thought I'd lose everything. And you didn't think to talk to me about it? I shot back. You made your choices, Sarah. Now you have to live with them. Our conversation ended as abruptly as it began, with Sarah storming off, her attempt at reconciliation falling flat. It was the closure I didn't realize I needed, a reminder that I was stronger than the pain she had caused. With the divorce finalized and the truth laid bare, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could see a path forward. Not just for myself, but for the life I wanted to build. And as for Rachel, well, let's just say she became more than a friend. But that's a story for another time. If you've been captivated by this roller coaster of emotions and revelations, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. The final stages of the story's conflict felt like a storm brewing on the horizon, inevitable and impossible to avoid. Sarah's attempts to reconcile were nothing more than a smokescreen. I knew she wasn't interested in repairing our relationship. She was trying to save face, but her desperation only fueled my determination to see things through to the end. Meanwhile, Rachel had become a steady presence in my life. Her support and honesty were like a beacon during the chaos. But I was careful not to lean on her too much. As much as I appreciated her, I didn't want to pull her further into the mess Sarah had created. The turning point came when Patricia called me one morning with a breakthrough. Daniel, we've traced the account Sarah and Eric were using. It's tied to a shell company. A shell company? I repeated, confused. Why would they need that? It looks like they were funneling money through it to hide assets, Patricia explained. The good news is, we have enough evidence to bring this to the court's attention. It strengthens your case significantly. I felt a mix of relief and anger. On one hand, the evidence was a major win. On the other, it confirmed just how calculated Sarah's actions had been. She wasn't just careless, she was deliberate. That same day, I received another call, this time from the police. They had identified the car that had been stalking Rachel. It was registered to Eric. That was the final straw. It was one thing for Sarah to try to sabotage me, but dragging Rachel into it crossed every line. Rachel and I met that evening to discuss our next steps. As we sat in her living room, the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. I can't believe he's this involved, Rachel said, shaking her head. What does he even gain from this? Power, I replied. Control. He probably thinks he can intimidate us into backing down. Well, he's wrong, she said firmly. I'm not scared of him. Her resilience was inspiring, but I could see the strain in her eyes. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. And if Sarah and Eric thought they could bully us into submission, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next pivotal moment came during the court hearing. Patricia presented the evidence we had gathered. The financial records, the shell company, and even the police report linking Eric to the stalking. Watching Sarah squirm under the weight of the truth was both satisfying and heartbreaking. This wasn't the woman I had married. The person sitting across from me was a stranger. The judge didn't take kindly to their antics. By the end of the hearing, I was granted a favorable settlement, and Sarah's claims were dismissed. But the victory was bittersweet. No legal win could erase the betrayal or undo the damage. After the hearing, I ran into Sarah outside the courthouse. She looked defeated, a shadow of the confident woman she once was. Was it worth it? I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked away, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted it to end like this, she said softly. Neither did I replied. But you made your choices. Now we both have to live with them. That conversation marked the end of our chapter. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was enough to help me move forward. With the legal battles behind me, life started to regain a sense of normalcy. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, though we were careful to take things slow. She had been my rock through the storm, and I wanted to ensure we built our relationship on a foundation of trust, not shared trauma. One evening, as we sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what's next?" "All the time," I said. "But for once, I'm not in a rush. I want to take things as they come." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I like that plan." As the story approached its climax, the tension finally began to ease. The chaos of the past year had tested me in ways I never expected, but it also taught me valuable lessons about resilience, trust, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly have your back. Looking back, I realized that Sarah's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, I was finally ready to face it head-on. If you've been following this journey, thank you for sticking with me through the ups and downs. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and keep you on the edge of your seat. As the weeks passed, the intensity of the conflict continued to build, reaching a boiling point that no one could have anticipated. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, a new twist threw everything into chaos, forcing me to face a truth I hadn't been ready to confront. It started with a phone call late one evening. Rachel and I were having dinner at her place, enjoying a rare moment of calm when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. "Mr. Carter?" the voice on the other end asked, their tone brisk and formal. "Yes, this is Daniel," I replied cautiously. "This is Officer Reynolds with the Austin Police Department. We've uncovered new information regarding your case. Would you be available to come down to the station tomorrow morning?" My heart raced. "Of course, what's this about?" "I'd prefer to discuss it in person," Officer Reynolds said, "but I can tell you it's related to the ongoing investigation involving Eric Johnson." The name hit me like a brick. What had Eric done now? When I arrived at the station the next morning, Officer Reynolds wasted no time getting to the point. He showed me a series of documents and photographs that painted a damning picture of Eric's involvement in multiple fraudulent schemes, many of which had ties to Sarah. "This isn't just about the money," Officer Reynolds explained. "Eric has been using Sarah, and likely others, to cover his tracks. The shell company we traced wasn't just for hiding assets. It was part of a larger operation involving embezzlement and tax evasion." I stared at the evidence, my mind reeling. Sarah hadn't just been complicit. She'd been an active participant in Eric's schemes. The realization made my stomach churn. This wasn't the person I had married. This was someone I barely recognized. "Where does this leave me?" I asked, my voice heavy with uncertainty. "For now, you're not a target," Officer Reynolds said, "but we may need your cooperation as a witness if this goes to trial." As I left the station, I felt a mix of relief and dread. On one hand, I was grateful to be cleared of any involvement on the other. The idea of being dragged into a criminal case against Sarah and Eric was overwhelming. When I told Rachel what had happened, she listened intently, her expression a blend of concern and determination. "This explains a lot," she said, "but it doesn't change the fact that you've done nothing wrong. Don't let them pull you into their mess any more than they already have." Her words were a comfort, but they didn't erase the lingering unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The next pivotal moment came just a few days later. I was at home, sifting through old paperwork, when there was a knock at the door. To my surprise, it was Sarah. She looked disheveled, her usual confidence replaced by an air of desperation. "Daniel, I need your help," she said, her voice trembling. "Help?" I repeated, struggling to keep my anger in check. "After everything you've done, you think you can just show up here and ask for help? Please," she begged. "I didn't know what Eric was really involved in. I got in over my head, and now I don't know what to do." Her words might have moved me once, but now they rang hollow. That's not my problem anymore, Sarah. You made your choices. Now you have to deal with the consequences. She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. I know I messed up, but I'm scared. Daniel Eric's dangerous. He's been threatening me ever since the investigation started. For a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once loved, the vulnerability, the fear. But I couldn't let that cloud my judgment. I had to protect myself. If you're in danger, go to the police, I said firmly. But don't expect me to clean up your mess. Sarah left without another word, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As I watched her walk away, I felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, I didn't want to see her hurt. But I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. The climax of the story came just a week later. Rachel and I were out running errands when I received an urgent call from Patricia. Daniel, I need you to come to my office immediately, she said, her tone grave. It's about Sarah and Eric. When I arrived, Patricia laid everything out. Eric had been arrested earlier that day, and Sarah was now a key witness in the case against him. But there was more. Eric had implicated Sarah in several of his schemes, claiming she had been a willing accomplice. Do you think she's telling the truth? I asked, struggling to process the information. Patricia hesitated. It's hard to say she might have been manipulated, but there's enough evidence to suggest she knew more than she let on. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent months unraveling the lies and betrayal, only to discover that the truth was even darker than I'd imagined. That night, as Rachel and I sat in my living room, the weight of everything finally caught up with me. I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or turn back. You've been through so much, Rachel said, her voice gentle, but you're still here, standing strong. That says a lot about who you are. Her words were a balm to my soul, reminding me that despite the chaos, I still had the power to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As the story reached its climax, the tension finally began to ease. The legal battles were behind me, and the truth had come to light. Sarah and Eric would face the consequences of their actions, and I was free to start a new chapter. If you've been following this journey, thank you for sticking with me through every twist and turn. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and keep you on the edge of your seat. With Eric behind bars and Sarah entangled in the fallout of his schemes, the storm that had consumed my life for months was finally beginning to calm. But as the dust settled, I found myself facing the question, what now? For the first time in years, I had no one else to answer to, no partner to appease, no looming crisis to navigate. It was a strange, liberating feeling, but it also left me with the daunting task of figuring out who I was outside of everything that had happened. The resolution with Sarah came quietly. She pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testifying against Eric. The terms of her plea deal spared her jail time, but she would spend years on probation and was required to pay restitution for her role in the schemes. When I saw her in court for the final hearing, she looked like a shadow of the woman I had married, hollow, subdued, and visibly weighed down by her choices. As we left the courthouse for the last time, Sarah approached me in the hallway. Daniel, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm sorry for everything. I studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her eyes. There was no joy in her downfall, no satisfaction in her apology, just a deep, aching sadness. I hope you find a way to move forward, I said simply. It was all I could offer. Forgiveness would take time, if it ever came at all. And with that, we parted ways for good. Life after Sarah wasn't easy, but it was a chance to start fresh. Rachel became an integral part of that journey. What had begun as a friendship forged in shared struggle grew into something deeper, something neither of us had been expecting. We took things slowly, not wanting to rush into anything before we were ready. But as the months passed, it became clear that what we had was real. Rachel brought out a side of me I hadn't seen in years, one that was hopeful, confident, and open to new possibilities. And in turn, I gave her the stability and support she had been craving after her own tumultuous past. One day, as we walked hand in hand through the park, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, for everything you've been through, you've come out stronger on the other side." I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I couldn't have done it without you." Her laugh was warm and light. "Don't give me too much credit. You were always strong. You just needed a little reminder." Our relationship wasn't the only thing that flourished. The clarity that came from leaving the chaos behind allowed me to refocus on my career. I poured my energy into building my consulting business, helping companies streamline their operations and improve efficiency. It was work I was passionate about, and it gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Months turned into a year, and before I knew it, I was standing in the backyard of the home Rachel and I had bought together, a modest but cozy place, filled with light, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. Max, my loyal dog, lounged at my feet as Rachel tended to the garden, her face glowing in the afternoon sun. For the first time in a long time, life felt simple, peaceful, right. Looking back, I realized that the trials I had faced weren't just about betrayal or heartbreak. They were about rediscovering who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. And while the journey had been painful, it had also been transformative. The story doesn't end here. Of course, life is full of twists and turns, and I know there will be challenges ahead. But now, I face them with a sense of strength and clarity I never thought possible. To anyone watching who's been through something similar, whether it's a broken relationship, a betrayal, or a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, I hope my story reminds you that there's light on the other side of the darkness. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But if you keep moving forward, one step at a time, you'll find your way. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your support means the world to me. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more stories that inspire, challenge, and keep you coming back for more. Here's to new beginnings, and to whatever comes next.